After many laborious months of surface preparation, sanding and repairs, all of our panels are ready to go. And we're ready to start putting some epoxy on so we can protect it. But it's not as simple as just slapping some epoxy primer in here. We gotta make sure all of our panels are properly prepared, and we gotta use some seam sealer to ensure water doesn't get in areas it's not supposed to. We gotta make sure this is done right so these things can last another 50 years. My name is Trooper Max, and I'm restoring a car that's been off the road since 1977. But I've never done this before. I've taken the time to do my research, and I'm building the car of my dreams, hoping to inspire others to do the same. All right, we're back at her here on the 72 Nova. Everything's stripped. We've done some very basic repairs, some hammer and dolly, made sure that all of our panels are as straight as possible, all of our dents are gone, but we still have all this bare metal to deal with. Now, I can't just take epoxy and start spraying these things. Even though we've done so much surface prep, there's still things we gotta do. And if you look around, you'll actually start seeing we've got some flash rust happening on one of the fenders. The hood is in pretty rough shape because we're doing a whole bunch of body repairs on it. And a lot of the other panels still need some work done. We haven't sealed our doors all completely. We still have Ospho to do. So that's what we're gonna start doing. Now we're gonna start with the messiest part first. Now most of these panels have already had internal frame coating because when I was repairing them, I had shot it in there. But there's some areas we did some repairs and some things we didn't even touch yet, like the doors. So I wanna really seal all the rust. So any sort of rust, we're gonna use an encapsulator. We're gonna hit that, let that dry, and then once that's dry, then it can be hit by epoxy primer. But because epoxy primer is porous, we don't wanna put that directly on rust because that will just have the rust come back. So that's what we're gonna start with. So as usual, our two weapons of choice, internal frame coating and rust encapsulator. We're just gonna start with that. Let's start with the doors. Flip her around. Basically, any areas where there's rust, I'm gonna try to hit it with this stuff. It's just all the corners here, basically, inside and out. And then we're just gonna wipe away the excess. There are some parts in here that are not covered. So this is my last opportunity to kind of tackle the inside of this now that all the work has been done. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna use our internal frame coating as usual. And I got this long piece of wire here, basically it's a coat hanger, just so that I can get in there and hit all these areas. So I'm gonna hit all the areas inside here, make sure everything's 100% protected, because then once we clean it up, we're ready to paint this thing. The first thing I want to do is do some sanding. And I know you're saying, well, they're already sanded. They are, but the thing is, we're not going to be sanding to remove material, but rather to scuff it up to add some tooth. Tooth is basically adding texture to the surface, so when we add our epoxy primer, it's going to have something to adhere to. So that's going to be important. Now, most of these are already done, so we're just going to be touching things up. But at the same time, there were some areas where I saw some high points on our panels. This kind of gives us the last opportunity to take our panels and to cut down any sort of highs. We don't want any high points because at this point when the epoxy goes on, there's no going back unless we go back and grind it down. We don't want to do that. So I got a 120 grit. I'm just basically going to run all the panels I have, add some texture. That includes on the inside of the doors, any sort of area, and make sure that there's a scuffed surface on every single panel here. So at this point, a lot of people could be getting ready for their epoxy. Now in our case, we're going to be doing one extra step. Now, because I have some flash rust happening and there's some areas with pitting, I've decided I'm going to put Ospho on all my exterior panels. I know it's kind of a risk, but honestly, it's worked really well for me in the past, so I'm just going to do it. Next stage is to do basically some wax and grease remover, so I'm going to go do my wax and grease remover on every single panel, and at that point I can move on to either Ospho or epoxy, depending on what we want to do. Alright, so all our panels are stripped, they have tooth, they've been cleaned. Now it's time for the Ospho, just to give us that extra layer of protection. So I'm actually gonna start on the bottom of the hood here just because I have done this before, but I was doing some body work with heat, so it could have damaged that. So all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my Ospho and I'm just gonna go around this whole thing. I'm gonna go on this side of the hood, do the other side, and just keep going around every single panel. And then we'll get to the fenders just to see if we can scrub off that surface rust that remains. All right, Ospho is now on. All the panels are coated front and back, just a thin layer. I don't wanna go heavy. I was able to take a scuff pad and some Ospho, and the rust, the flash rusting came off no problem, so it's really cool. We were able to get rid of that. I think it's gonna be better just to protect this. We're gonna now take the panels downstairs to a colder area with not a lot of humidity, and we're gonna leave them there for at least 72 hours before we get on the next stage, so it's pretty cool. Okay, so the next stage before painting, everybody's favorite, cleaning. Now, if we didn't have Ospho on these, we would just take the wax and grease remover, start cleaning and go to paint. Unfortunately, we have to do an extra step. We have to use lacquer thinner because we used Ospho, and I'm just gonna have to go all the way around. I'm gonna do every nook and cranny here, and I'm also gonna use a scuff pad. This is also gonna get rid of any sort of rust that might be remaining on the surface, so I don't mind doing this. It's just a little bit more cleaning, and then that way the epoxy will adhere better. So I'm just gonna take the time, grab my lacquer thinner, splash it on the thing, and go over every single piece of metal we have here. This is gonna take some time, but it's really gonna ensure that we have the best adhesion possible with our epoxy. All right, so now we're on to the final stage before painting, and that's cleaning. This is the part, I'm gonna slow down. A lot of people wanna rush this part. This is the part you do not wanna half-ass. So I'm gonna be using some wax and grease remover. I'm using Prep-All, I like this stuff, it's pretty good. I'm gonna go all around, I'm gonna spray the whole car, every single piece, wipe it down, make sure this thing is as clean as possible so we don't have any adhesion issues. All right, so a lot going on. This is our crazy setup. I've literally got as many things in here as I could fit. I wish I could have more, but space is a premium, so we're gonna do what we can. So we're just gonna get set up. I'll show you what we're working with. All right, so these are our tools. We got our epoxy, we got our activator. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, so basically 50% of one, other 50% makes up 100%. Put it in here, and we're gonna be using an electric sprayer like last time. This is a great tool. Don't need a compressor, don't need hoses. It's really good. I'm putting a 1.8mm tip on here. Last time my tip was too big, and we had a lot of dripping. At the same time, the spray pattern is fully open, so it's as wide as possible. And at the same time, we have to mix everything, so I got cups. So we're gonna be using the cups to do that, and then we have our mixing blade. The only thing I find really annoying with epoxy, at least the ones I've worked with, this one in particular, it's really thick and goopy. So you need to mix the entire thing and then do your proportions, but then some of the stuff gets left on the blade, so it's kind of hard to get an exact 50-50 match. Now, because epoxy is dangerous stuff, we're gonna be opening up the doors, we're gonna be using a full suit, full mask, everything like that, and we have a lot of ventilation here. There's a lot of air coming in and air coming out, lots of fans going. Do not do this in a closed environment. There's a lot going on here. I'm just gonna start going and doing this, and we're just gonna spray this as much as possible. I don't have any tips because I'm not a professional sprayer. It's just a matter of getting it done. So after an absolutely insane day, this is where we're at. Most of the panels have been painted and they look pretty good overall. However, we did run into some problems. First problem is I ran out of space. I have all this stuff, nowhere to put it, not enough stands. I realized halfway through I just didn't have enough room for everything, so I took on way too much. Second problem I ran into is the fact my sprayer ran out of batteries. So I had 2 batteries, I thought it would do it, and it just ran out. And then I found myself taking the epoxy and painting manually inside the doors, and even that I still wasn't able to use at all. So kind of got myself into a little situation. I would do, if I were to do this again, there's a couple of things I'd do differently. First of all, I wouldn't do so many pieces at the same time. Second of all, mix smaller amounts. I mixed too much, so then I was forced to keep going. And the third thing is it's kind of hard to actually see what you sprayed with the gray. So what I would recommend is actually for the first coat going black, because then you could really see all the metal sticking out. The second coat doing gray, because we need gray for the next stage in the bodywork phase. However, I think the first stage doing black would be better, just so you could see everything, but it is what it is. Anyways, before we do the second coat, there's something I want to do. So now is the time where I could use my seam sealer. So we're going to be using seam sealers in different areas, just to fill any areas where water's not supposed to get through. All right, for seam sealer, using a 3M heavy bodied seam sealer. Works really well, good stuff. But man, does this stuff cure fast. You really got to be prepared. So once I get started, I'm not stopping. Okay, so we put our epoxy in the applicator, and then you take the nozzle and just kind of spin it on. Now this stuff, once it mixes, you got to keep moving because it does not take long to harden. It comes with 2 of these tips, but man, this stuff hardens fast. So you have to have a plan. So my plan is to do the whole circumference of this door. So there's a bend here, it just goes all the way around where the skin of the door sits. So we're going to do it all the way around, and then inside the door itself too. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get to that, but we'll see. Trick here is keep moving. Already drying, that's crazy. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm just gonna keep going all the way around. This is gonna take all my concentration, so I'm just gonna crank it up and get this thing done. All right, so progress is pretty good. I ended up stopping because the epoxy hardened in the nozzle, so we weren't able to keep going, but managed to do the outsides of the door. I even did around the scoop because there's actually little holes in areas, and I know I can't necessarily seal them. So if we put filler on this, and water gets in through underneath, which it can, then it will absorb the water into the filler and it's going to rust even if the top is painted. That's why I'm using seam sealer, and there's little pinholes I had here. I put seam sealer in there too. I'm going to sand those down nice and flat, but any sort of holes, because when I was shooting the internal frame coating, I saw frame coating coming from inside there, which means water can get through. Filler is porous, it has to be sealed from both sides. I can't seal it from the inside, so what I have to do is, this epoxy is totally waterproof, so anywhere I see pinholes, epoxy. And then we're going to get it nice and smooth. We're going to spray it again. And then once we're doing our final filler and all that, our bodywork, we're going to cover everything. But for now, this is just so that things don't rot from the inside. This is how it always happens. That's why you see on some cars, big patch of filler, and it just peels right off because the water got in from behind. So that's what we want to stop. All right, so before I put seam sealer on the bottom there's one more thing about the doors. Now, if you look in here, you'll see these metal squares. We had done that previously to hide the trim holes on the outside. But the thing is, in order for this to work, we need to ensure that water never ever gets behind these squares, because if it does, it's going to go in the filler and crack the outside. So the way we're going to stop that, I'm not going to be using the two-part epoxy. I'm going to use a different seam sealer. This is a brushable one, so I'm just going to be taking a little piece of plastic here and just going to cover it so that water doesn't get in there, because we do not want water back there. So I'm going to do it for all. I know it looks kind of crappy, but you know what? It's the inside of a door. I don't really care. What I care about is the fact that I do not want water getting in there behind and ruining all our work. That's really all I care about. So I'll do all the doors. So after nearly a year of sanding, repairing, grinding, and finally painting, all of our pieces are complete. And the first thing I feel is a tremendous sense of relief. I gotta say, this is crazy. You know, I cannot believe all this stuff is in primer. So in terms of elements like the seam sealer, the 3M did an amazing job. The two-part epoxy is just so smooth, it finishes so nicely. You can't even tell there's seam seal in these areas, it just looks great. Whereas on the other hand, things like the one part, like the Eastwood brush on, it doesn't look very good, so I'm glad I just kept it inside the doors. But otherwise, I gotta say, I understand the 3M is very expensive, but man, you get what you pay for, it just looks great. This was so much work, coming from a guy that's never done this before, and just thinking to the shape that all this stuff was in. Most of these parts didn't even look like they could be saved, and from a beginner standpoint, there was just so much work to do. So knowing that, not only did we save these pieces, but we saved every single exterior panel on this car, and knowing that the history will live on with all the previous pieces is pretty cool. There's not one aftermarket piece on this car when it comes to this. This is pretty cool. So this is really exciting. It was kind of a crazy goal, and we did it, we saved it. And at the same time, doing all this stuff, it was a lot of work, because you would finish one thing and another thing starts rusting. Even with Ospho, in some cases, rust comes back because it gets so humid, and it's just a huge relief knowing that all this stuff is covered. So finally all this stuff is covered. It's not done by any means. There's still lots of work to do. We're gonna have to be doing the next stage, which is putting on filler and doing the high build primers and sanding, blocking, all this stuff. There's so much work to do, but for now we could take all this stuff and put it away. That's the great thing. We're actually going to be working on the other part of the car. We still have to strip the outside. We got to do the front subframe, so there's still lots of work to do before we get back to this. So just knowing that this is protected, it's awesome. So this is awesome. I'm really happy about it. History saved. We can move on. I think the next thing we've got to do is got to rip that subframe off. So that's what we're going to do.